You're watching InsideThunder.com, powered by Clear Channel Media and Entertainment.
Hi, I'm Randy Renner on InsideThunder.com, and as we roll toward training camp, we've put together a special show for you. We're going to talk to John Hamm, who is one of the nation's foremost experts on the NBA salary cap and the collective bargaining agreement, and he lives right here in the Oklahoma City metro. We'll also hear from Michael Kinney of the Norman Transcript, who covers the Thunder extensively, went on all of their playoff road trips last season. So we'll hear from Mike Kinney of the Norman Transcript in just a moment. First, though, let's talk some salary cap and CBA with John Hamm. John, thanks for being with us and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Well, your thoughts, first of all, on what the Thunder have done this offseason and what some fans may think that they haven't done. They weren't able to get Pau Gasol. They weren't able to get Mike Miller. But a lot of that was the simple fact that they were limited, not because the ownership was cheap, as is sometimes the national narrative, but because of what the salary cap would and would not allow.
Yeah, that's right. So the Thunder entered the offseason. Their team salary was above the salary cap. And kind of the misconception I hear a lot, some people tend to apply the NFL salary cap concept where there's a hard salary cap. They apply that to the NBA, and they're totally different animals. The NBA has got a soft salary cap system, so when you're above the salary cap, you are limited in what you can do to sign free agents. So they had a couple of smaller salary cap exceptions that they could use to chase free agents. They did pursue Pau Gasol, and they were limited by the salary cap rules. They could only offer him a contract starting at $5.3 million unless they could talk the Lakers into some kind of a sign-and trade, which they were not interested in. So, ultimately that didn't pan out, but they wound up with Anthony Morrow, a fantastic three-point shooter, and he's going to fill a need I think this team was really needing last season.
And, John, with what Morrow has done so far in his career, he's an outstanding three-point shooter, and it looks like the Thunder have gotten him really for a relatively cheap price.
Especially when you look at what some of the other shooters went for in free agency. You had guys like Ben Gordon, they got $4.5 million from Orlando, and Jody Meeks got 3 years and $18 to $20 million from Detroit. Even Caron Butler got $4.5 million from Detroit as well. So getting him at the price, getting him at a contract starting at $3.2 million, is only guaranteed for 2 years. The third year is unguaranteed. It's a great price. It reminds me a lot of the Daquan Cook contract from a few years ago.
Talking with John Hamm, a salary cap expert as far as the NBA is concerned. And, John, of course, they also signed Sebastian Telfair to a very cap-friendly number. And then recently they let Hasheem Thabeet go, which really shouldn't surprise anyone. That frees up some wiggle room roster-wise and money-wise.
If you listen to Sam Presti talk, you will hear him talk about flexibility. And so really that's what this move did with Hasheem Thabeet. His contract was non-guaranteed. After September 1st, if he had not been waived, it would have become guaranteed for the season. And they made the decision to go ahead and open up that roster spot. This gives them one roster spot to play with. They converted his contract. Rather, the simple thing to do would have been just to waive him. They went through a transaction where they traded him to Philadelphia, which creates a small trade exception that, it's there for flexibility's sake. It may go unused. It may come in handy at some point. So they've got an extra spot available, and we'll have to see what they do when training camp comes around. Over the past few years, they have added guys coming out of training camp, so maybe someone will wind up on the roster.
And that certainly may happen. They may decide to do that with Josh Huestis. They may, though, just leave that roster spot open. And, John, you were talking about trade exceptions. We see that a lot, especially with the Thunder. Talk about the value of those trade exceptions.
The bonus there is that you are able to complete a trade without matching salaries. So when you're over the salary cap, as the Thunder are, in order to complete a trade, you have to match salaries within a certain dollar amount. But having a trade exception available, for example, they created one here with Hasheem Thabeet. They could acquire a player making, say, $1.2 million and not have to send out matching salary in return. So, again, it's something that can potentially land you a useful guy or give you some flexibility in a larger trade if you go down that route. Again, it's just another piece there that might come in handy.
John, let's shift gears just a little bit. You know, a lot of folks are getting all worked up about Kevin Durant and his possible free agency coming up in 2016 with a new contract situation. But there's a much more pressing contract that's up with Reggie Jackson. The Thunder have until Halloween to re-sign him to an extension or have him wind up becoming a restricted free agent. This stuff with Reggie could get very interesting.
It's getting more interesting by the week. I've got to admit, you know, at one point I kind of thought that, you know, some 4-year, $32 million extension would cinch it up. But then you saw what happened in free agency. Gordon Hayward went out and got, you know, basically a max contract from the Charlotte Hornets. I'm going to make that mistake for another year now.
I will too.
The Utah Jazz matched that offer. And then you saw with Chandler Parsons where, you know, it just takes one team that can, you know, throw out kind of a poisonous offer there to scare off the other team from matching. It's interesting if you go back and you look at the history with Sam Presti and the Thunder. Players that hit free agency typically don't come back. You know, Daquan Cook hit free agency and came back. Derek Fisher, Grant Jarrett. But other than that, he very much likes to lock up players in advance. So it would be a little unprecedented for him to allow the October 31st deadline to lapse and let him go into restricted free agency next year and see what happens.
Well, it'll sure be interesting to see how that plays out. And, of course, talking about Reggie, here recently he talked to Darnell Mayberry while he was in China for an NBA event. And in that interview, he said he really has never thought of himself as anything other than a starter, that he has always wanted to be a starter in the NBA. And he also said that he's paid close attention to the new contracts, especially what happened, as you mentioned earlier, with Gordon Hayward and Chandler Parsons. A lot of people probably thought $10 million a year might be the ceiling for Reggie Jackson, but now with these new contracts, $10 million might be the floor, and who knows how high it might go.
I agree with you. It is very difficult, I think, to convince young players coming into the league on their rookie skill contracts that you're going to be on the bench. Now, some of them, that's their ceiling. You know, that's the type of player they are. Reggie has obviously proven that he's capable of being a starting point guard in this league. And, you know, these guys play professional basketball because they want to make them, you know, as much money as they can. I'm sure championships and stuff like that are valuable to them, but really it comes down to money. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of see, you know, how this plays out, because in a way I kind of think Reggie's elevation may be a little bit on the higher end than maybe even the Thunder expected. It's a pleasant surprise.
On maybe the bad end of this, depending upon how things go, could Reggie Jackson become James Harden 2.0?
You know, there are some similarities. It is a little bit different. James Harden was, you know, clearly he was a max contract guy, and he was a guy that could command a 5-year extension for, you know, max money. And the Thunder, because of the new rules put in the 2011 collective bargaining agreement, could not offer him a 5-year deal. They gave that to Russell Westbrook, therefore they could not offer it to any other player. And so James kind of rightfully, you know, saw his value and kind of flexed his muscles and wound up somewhere where he got the contract that he felt he deserved. Reggie is not quite there. I don't imagine that there's any team that, you know, probably would trade for him and sign him to a 5-year max contract. But I do believe next summer there could be some teams that would float a lot of money his way, especially when you consider the salary cap is probably going to rise significantly here in a couple of years with the new television deal, and may not scare off any teams to kind of throw a large offer at him to bring him in as their starting point guard.
Right, and it only takes one team to do that and kind of throw everything out of kilter, so to speak. Now, with Kevin Durant's possible free agency coming up in 2016, John, do you think it's important for the Thunder to maybe get into the tax territory, the luxury tax, go beyond the line, just to prove to him that they're willing to do that as they get close to his free agency coming up in 2016?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, that being a tax-paying team, in the previous agreement, that was almost a must if you wanted to win a title. Now that we've got 3 years into the new agreement, I think you're seeing a leveling out where you don't necessarily have to be a tax-paying team to be a title contender. So on one hand, yeah, it would be a show that we are committed, but Oklahoma City's model has been to draft young guys on their rookie contracts, get them for 3 or 4 years at inexpensive money, and then extend them. So on one hand, they're always going to be kind of on the low end on the pay scale, at least until some of these guys come up, for extensions. But, I don't know if Reggie's extension necessarily would tip the scales there. If the Thunder, felt they had to go in a different direction, they could, bring in an equally talented player and probably prove the same thing to Kevin as if they had, spent a lot of money on Reggie.
John Hamm, a local salary cap expert, nationally known, actually. John, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us, and we really appreciate it. We look forward to having you on in the future.
Thank you very much, Randy. I appreciate it.
And we will be back in just a moment. We'll talk to Michael Kinney of the Norman Transcript about his thoughts on what the Thunder have done this summer and what they may be doing as we head toward training camp, so stay with us.
You're watching InsideThunder.com, powered by Clear Channel Media and Entertainment. Listen to the iHeartRadio Music Festival live on KJ103FM.com and on the official iHeartRadio Music Festival 14 station online and on your app Friday and Saturday nights, September 19th and 20th, starting at 7 p.m. Pacific. And now, back to Randy Renner on InsideThunder.com.
I'm Randy Renner, back here on InsideThunder.com as we continue with our preseason show as we get ready for training camp, which is coming up now very, very shortly. A lot of the Thunder players coming back into town to begin some individual workouts, and sometimes some will get together, have some 3-on-3 games, that sort of thing, as we get closer and closer to the official start of training camp. Want to bring in Mike Kinney now from the Norman Transcript, who covers the Thunder on a regular basis. Mike, how in the world are you today?
I'm doing very well, Randy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We thank you for taking the time to be with us. And first of all, Mike, let's get right into what your thoughts are on what the Thunder have accomplished this offseason.
Well, it's hard to say exactly what they've accomplished because they really didn't do a ton of things. If you look at all the activity that took place in the offseason from the other leading contenders, the Thunder was probably the one team that did the least amount of work. That doesn't mean they weren't trying. They just didn't add a lot of different pieces to their lineup. I mean, obviously, probably the biggest piece is bringing in Merle, the shooting guard, which is an obvious position that they needed, someone to be able to hit from the three-point range with accuracy and with unconsciousness at times. So that was probably the biggest free agent pickup. And then obviously the draft picking up the kids from Michigan and obviously Stanford. So I think it was a nice off season, but it wasn't probably one that the fans will mark down as a turning point.
Well, I agree. I think, the fans, especially some of them, probably disappointed, especially when you heard the names that were out there, that Pau Gasol was a possibility, that Mike Miller was a possibility. The Thunder, of course, didn't get either one of those guys. Do you think they did enough, though, to maintain where their spot in the pecking order in the Western Conference?
I think they did enough to be able to get back to where they were last year. Yeah. I mean, this past season, which was obviously the Western Conference Finals. And then it's just really just being able to keep everyone healthy. I mean, we obviously remember Serge Ibaka going down right in during the San Antonio series and having to miss a game or two and then having to come back. And then obviously the ins and outs of Westbrook during the regular season. So I think their biggest thing is, even though they didn't add pieces, they feel that if they can keep everyone healthy throughout the year, that's almost like adding different pieces to the team. Because any team that has Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, Serge Ibaka, and then obviously an up-and-coming Reggie Jackson, I believe they feel they have enough to contend for not only the Western Conference title, but the NBA championship.
Well, you brought up Reggie Jackson, and speaking of Reggie, he's at that point where James Harden was a couple of years ago. How do you think things are going to end up with these contract negotiations with Reggie?
It's just so remarkable that it's taken that same James Harden path where the Thunder kept saying publicly that they're confident that they'll be able to sign him, that they're working toward it, and that they believe they're going to do it, but you don't see any ground being gained. And then you see in stories yesterday about how Reggie has looked around the offseason and saw a lot of the big contracts that other players are getting, and we know that Reggie is not someone who is shy about how much he thinks of his game and what he can do. So I'm sure he's not going to he's not looking to give anyone any type of hometown discount. You know, he said it in the exit interviews. He wants to be a starting point guard on an NBA team. Obviously, with Russell here, that's going to be kind of difficult. And just with the money that the Thunder can offer, the amount of money they can offer, it's not like they can sue them over with some huge contract. So it's a difficult situation. And since you really don't know what's going through Reggie's head right now and what he's looking to settle for, it's hard to gauge. But if I was a betting man, I'd probably say 55-45 that they're not going to get a contract done this year.
You know, that's certainly the way it looks. And like you mentioned, those new contracts, Gordon Hayward, the 4 years, over $60 million. Chandler Parsons, 3 years, about $45 million. It looks like Reggie Jackson's price is going up and maybe way up.
Exactly. You know, the Gordon Hayward max deal kind of threw everything off kilter, and then what Chandler Parsons was able to get, and then Reggie obviously knows that he's a valuable commodity. He's a point guard who can shoot, who can drive, and can play defense and can pass. So he obviously believes he's worth more than the probably what the Thunder were hoping to be able to get him for, in that 8 to 9 to 10 million range. He knows he can probably get more out there on the open market, just like James Harden knew he'd be able to get more on the open market. So it's just a tough situation, and you can't, unless the Thunder are willing to go into the luxury tax range and then have 4 players making $10 million plus a season. That's kind of difficult. If they weren't willing to do it for James, I don't know if they're going to be willing to do it for Reggie.
Yeah, that's the big question. But, one thing that may be in the Thunder's favor here as we move toward next season, Kendrick Perkins' $9.5 million salary will be off the books, so they'll have that going for them. But either way, it's going to be a tight fit when it comes to that luxury tax line.
Exactly. We're starting to see, after 3-4 years of what the Thunder have been able to do here in Oklahoma City, and the excitement and taking them to heights that I know most Thunder fans probably didn't see coming in 2008, 2009. The reality of being a small market team is starting to kick in, and what you can do and money-wise, and then who you can bring in free agent-wise to be able to surround your star players. It's once again, it's the thing that most small markets have to deal with, but the Thunder, because it's such a young team, is starting to kick in now that the fans are starting to realize just how tough it really is.
And, Michael, that's, the other thing that a lot of people are wondering about is how this may or may not impact Kevin Durant's situation as we roll toward 2016. How he feels about Reggie Jackson and how important or not it is for the Thunder to re-sign him. Does he consider, and everybody else consider, Reggie Jackson to be a very important of this? Or do a lot of people consider that Reggie Jackson, in reality, is a backup point guard? Maybe they don't want to pay him that. Maybe they think he's not worth what the market may bear now. You just go out, you let him go out and get another backup point guard.
Exactly. You have the feeling that they believe Reggie can be a pivotal part of this team, right, but I don't know if they believe he's on that same level of you have to keep him as a Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook level. So I think he's still, and I don't even know if he's in that surge level to where you would do everything to try to keep him. So it's still hard to figure out because Sam Presti, once again, keeps so many things close to his vest. As far as how it affects Kevin, I think this offseason was probably the most important in terms of his future and how he sees the organization than anyone in the past, because as he said, during the free agency period, this is the first time he went out and tried to recruit players to come to Oklahoma City to make sure they had something for the future. He went out and saw Paul Gasol. He went out and saw Mike Miller and a few other players. And I think the most telling quote he had after it was all said and done was he did everything possible to be able to try to get Paul Gasol here, but it's hard to be able to convince someone to be able to choose an L.A. or New York or Chicago to put them behind, to leave those behind and come to Oklahoma City. I think that once again the reality of the situation maybe crystallized a little bit more for even KD.
It certainly may. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. Michael Kinney with the Norman Transcript. Mike, thanks very much for joining us, and we look forward to having you on many more times here on InsideThunder.com.
No doubt. Look forward to it. Let's have a great year.
All right, we will certainly try. That's Mike Kinney from the Norman Transcript. Of course, earlier we heard from salary cap expert John Hamm. We thank both those guys for being with us on this edition of InsideThunder.com as we put a special show together as we head toward training camp. We're going to do many more of these. We're going to expand this. We hope to get out and put you on some of these programs with Voice of the Fan segment and a whole lot more. And we'll have extensive coverage from Thunder Media Day coming up. And then, of course, training camp. And then before you know it, the regular season will be here. Should be another fun ride with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So stay with us and keep clicking back. We'll update everything for you right here on InsideThunder.com.